A 1970s Lotus Elite is a little bit like the girl in Longfellow's poem. When she's good, she's very good indeed, but when she's bad, she's horrid. I love my Lotus. It's a brilliant car, but when it does go wrong, which it does reasonably often, then, as I'm about to show you, it can be a real pig to fix. A few weeks ago I took this car out onto a tidal salt marsh and crossed my fingers that it would restart before the tide came in and washed us all away. Luckily it did, but I think some people thought I was exaggerating and that was fake peril, but it really wasn't, because the very next day when I went to start the car again it was running as rough as a stag weekend in Aberavon, and shortly after that it stopped firing completely. It's only just had a new fuel pump, so my first port of call when trying to trace the fault is the ignition system. So I put some ignition telltales in between the spark plugs and the HT leads and got some fairly random flickering, which makes me think that all is not well, probably somewhere around the distributor. I also took one of the spark plugs out. It's looking a little bit sooty to me, suggesting incomplete combustion. Now I don't think it's grossly overfueling, so that's probably also a sign of an ignition and misfiring problem. If you think you might be better at reading spark plug soot than me, and I'm more than happy to believe that you are, then do please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now, this is normally one of the easiest jobs on a car to fix, because the rotor arm just lifts out and the distributor's normally sat there right on top of the engine, but not on a Lotus. On this car, the distributor is very thoroughly buried under the world's biggest airbox and two twin choke carburetors. That airbox is in two halves, so the first job is to get the first stage of it off, which isn't terribly difficult, but being a Lotus it's not completely straightforward either. It's made of fiberglass and at least one of the lugs that it's held on by has broken off, so I'm going to have to try and get some fiberglass repair kit or something to remake that. I'm going to worry about that later though. The other thing about these steel rods that hold the airbox together is that they're made of steel and therefore conductive, so that if you drop one in the process of taking the airbox off, and it's more or less impossible not to, then do make sure that you've disconnected the battery first. Otherwise you're going to get a load of unexpected sparks and potentially blow things up, because at this point you've already got the carburetors exposed and potentially a load of petrol fumes. Luckily it's been a while since this has run, so there aren't any petrol fumes, but I won't make that mistake again. I'd forgotten that I hadn't disconnected the battery because I'd put it on to charge in the hope that this was going to be a quick job and I'd be able to fire it up again soon. Some hope that was. It's interesting being able to see under here because there's all sorts of stuff going on. So what's that? Where does that go? It does look like a car that could benefit from some rewiring. I was kind of naively hoping that getting off the first part of the airbox might be enough and I could get my fingers under to get at the distributor cap, but my fingers aren't 14 inches long and don't have 6 knuckles, so unfortunately the rest of it's going to have to come off as well, starting with these little speed pipes that feed the carburetors. Getting these speed pipes off is straightforward enough, apart from the fact that it's impossible to hold on to the nylock nuts that you remove, and so they tend to go flying down into the steering and the suspension, and if you're lucky they just end up in the bottom of the car, and if you're unlucky they end up lost in some crevice of the engine block. I think I've got them all accounted for now, but there was a lot of faffing about trying to retrieve them. I need to be able to properly get at the distributor to even understand which model it is, because they do seem to vary on these cars depending on which came to hand in the factory in Norfolk. I thought I could maybe see a serial number stamped into it on the front, but that just turned out to say England, so I was excited when I could feel something cast into it on the back. So if I can just get the phone in there, then I can see that that says, no, that just says Lucas, so that's not very much help at all. Before I start randomly pulling leads off and then forget which way round they went, I want to put some labels onto the HT leads and onto the distributor so that I can match everything up and get the right firing order. Normally I do this in a quite barbaric way with a little thing of Tipex, but it doesn't really answer here because I can't see the connection between the distributor and the plugs. So I'm going to do it properly, and I'm going to invest in a labelling machine. So I bought this one, which turned out to be complete rubbish. So I got rid of that and bought another one, which is a proper electrician's one from Screwfix, and it works much better. So we can put these labels onto, first of all, the HT leads at the plug end, so I know which order they go in there, and then I'll stick some labels onto the distributor and make a note of which ones line up with which, and then I can just cross-check that against what I know the firing order is on these cars, which is 1, 3, 4, 2. I have, of course, labelled the terminals on the distributor the wrong way round, so that messed with my head for a little bit, but it does work out in the end. And as long as I put them back in the same way that they came off, we should be okay. There is one piece of good news. With the airbox off, I could see where the coolant leak was coming from. It seems to be from a poor seal around this little short length of blue pipe, and the coolant is pooling in these recesses in the engine block and then dribbling down and looking like it was coming from somewhere a bit more worrying. So I'll get the calipers on it and measure the internal diameter I need for a length of coolant hose and get that ordered. I was genuinely quite worried that some gasket somewhere had failed and was going to need major surgery to replace. So that is a win. With the distributor cap finally accessible, I can start to take it off and get to the points and the condenser. It's all very dark under there and difficult to see, so this really is fighting me every step of the way, because when I go in there to take some pictures on my phone, every single one of them is either completely dark or completely blurry or both. But eventually we get there and I can see what I'm dealing with. And of course, what I'm dealing with is not in fact points and a condenser at all. This car's been upgraded with an aftermarket electronic ignition system. And what I'm looking at here is a little Hall effect sensor that links back to an electronic ignition coil. Now this is good news and bad news. It's bad news because it means it's not going to be the easy fix of points and condenser that I was hoping for. It's good news in that electronic ignition is normally more reliable. This flamethrower system by Pertronics has a good reputation for reliability. It's about £150 worth if you can find somebody who's got one in stock. So I'm not falling over myself to just play parts darts and put a new one in its place. It doesn't show any signs of having overheated and burnt out at the distributor end. These Hall effect sensors are not complicated things, they're just a rotating magnet and a bit of physics does the rest, so there's not a lot to go wrong there. The coil could be at fault, so that's still a possibility, but honestly it's not really the most likely thing to fail. The distributor cap doesn't seem to be in bad nick at all, and the rotor arm looks a bit second-hand, so we'll maybe put a replacement one of those on. But it leaves me a little bit stumped. The HT leads seem to be decent quality. Those plugs I'll replace because I might as well while I'm here, and they do look a bit tired, but I'm not convinced that they're the cause of the problem. Anyway, we'll replace the bits that are cheap to replace and put it all back together again and see if that runs any better, but I'm not holding out too much hope. The next thing I've got to do is what everybody who buys a labelling machine does, and go and stick labels on everything. I love my Lotus. When it's up and about, it's a fantastic thing to drive and it looks like nothing else on earth. This video didn't have a lot of footage of it driving around, but this one does, so I suggest you go and watch that next. Hopefully we can do some more of that next time.